Okay, round two. You ready?
I am.
All right. So, welcome back, everybody, to part 2 of this episode of Wonky Weekly.
I'm Rashaan James II.
And I'm Sid Solomon, still wonking it up.
Yeah.
Does dancing help?
I mean, maybe if other people were dancing.
That's the most chorus thing you've ever said. Hi, Rashaan.
Hi, Sid.
Whew. All right. So, part 1, we did a lot.
We did a lot.
Ready to pick up where we left off?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. Section 4, campaign contributions. We are on the bottom of page 10. Rashaan, you want to take a run at the beginning of this section?
Yeah. This is also one of the sections that gets really confused. And it is quite wonky. So when we get into the weeds, don't mind us. A, union funds, resources, personnel, and facilities. Number 1, except as provided in Article 3, no equity funds, resources, personnel, or facilities may be used to promote the candidacy of any person, and the candidates may not receive any contributions or other resources from equity given to promote their candidacies. This prohibition includes a ban on monetary contributions and the use of union stationery, equipment, facilities, personnel, or other resources to promote the candidate. The following are examples of the union funds resources that are strictly prohibited. And then it gives a list. So I'm not going to read the list, but here's the thing. You can't go inside of equity and make photocopies and say of vote for Rashaan. You can't use the equity logo at all. You cannot use the equity logo. I think that's one of the big things that people don't understand. So if I'm running for council and it says Rashaan James 2 and then it's our logo underneath, that is using the resources of the union. You cannot do that. Great. Now, employer resources, personnel, and facilities. No employer funds, resources, personnel, or facilities may be used to promote the candidacy or person. This is the same language as above. Now we're just talking about employer resources. The biggest confusion about this is that people think it's our employers. It is any employers. If I went to my fiance's job and I started to photocopy vote for Rashaan, that is using an employer's resources, which means it is against what this is. No employers, do not do it. Great. Number 2, the prohibition extends to every employer, which is exactly what I said, regardless of its nature or business, whether the union represents its employees. The prohibition extends to labor unions, nonprofit organizations, civic groups, or businesses of any kind, your school, anything, literally anything. Do it at home or pay for it. Pay for it at Kinko's. Members may not campaign for themselves or for any other candidate during time that is paid for by any employer, provided, however, that campaigning incidental to work or paid vacation, paid lunch or break hours, or similar times is permitted. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that. If I am in an audition, because of the fact that the employer has paid for that room, I cannot campaign in that room. Period. Great. That's what that means.
Yeah. I want to go back and to sort of talk about both of these sections, about equity's involvement in the campaign and employers' involvement in the campaign, and really go back to something that Ruth Kramer said in our episode about election procedures. These are the kinds of things, and the prohibitions on employers being involved, the kinds of examples you're giving. These are the things that I refer to as the ticky-tacky rules, that very often when a candidate finds out that they might have broken one, a response is often, oh, who cares? It's great to think about it. I think it's helpful to think about it the way that Ruth laid it out so beautifully, which is that you do not want an election in which the union as an institution is seen to favor one candidate over another. This is supposed to be fair and neutral. All members should have the same right and opportunity to run to help run their democratically elected union. And when it comes to employers, you don't want even the appearance of an employer having helped you to get elected to a union office, when part of your role in holding that union office is helping to decide what our contracts with those employers are going to look like. But most importantly, and we're going to get to this a little bit later on, remember what can happen if somebody breaks the rules. If a rule is broken and it's a reasonable assumption that because the rule is broken, somebody really benefited from it and it could have impacted the outcome of the election, we could be in a situation where we might have to rerun a portion of the election or the entirety of the election, or where the federal government might have to get involved in the running of our election. All of those things would be incredibly wasteful of time and resources and energy of the union that we know would be better using those resources elsewhere right now. So read through these really specific rules. Again, it goes into really specific detail here about ways in which you can break these rules. And I'll just say, err on the side of caution. If you're not sure, can I do this or can I not do this? Just don't do it. There are so many ways in which you can campaign for office, so many ways in which you can interact with and hear from and talk to your fellow members. It's really easy to avoid all of these pitfalls. So just stay as far away from them as you can, please. That brings us to section 5, the election itself. Kick us off, Rashaan.
The Election Compliance Committee. We talked about this before. Council will appoint an election compliance committee to oversee the conduct of the nominations and election. The Election Compliance Committee will be made up of between 3 and 5 members in good standing who may not be candidates for any officer or council positions. There's also an asterisk. They also have to not be promoting any of the candidates for officers and councilor positions. Mm-hmm. We want them as non-biased as possible so that if anything comes to the Election Compliance Committee, this is the committee that if there are election protests, this is where they go. The mail ballot for election or officer and councilors. The election. The 2022 election for first vice president, second vice president, third vice president, secretary, treasurer, and councilors will be conducted by mail ballot. This is the thing we talked about before. It has to be. It has to be because of federal law. Everyone says, well, why can't we do an email vote, or why can't we do it on the website? This is why. Mailing of ballots. All ballots will be mailed to the last known home address of each member on file with Equity in or around Tuesday, April 26th. So everyone, go check and see where you are registered with Equity, what address you have, because that is where your ballot will go. I moved in 2018 from one apartment to another, and I didn't change my address, and my ballot went to my old address. I had to go pick it up. If I hadn't picked it up, there was an opportunity for number 3, replacement ballots. Members requesting a replacement ballot shall make the request to Global Election Services. They are our third-party vendor that runs the big part of the election, getting the ballots out and making the ballots. At the address shown at the end of this policy, no later than 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time on Monday, May 16th. So you have until May 16th to say, oh no, I don't have a ballot and I still need a ballot. Ballot return. Ballots shall be returned to the independent election firm at the designated address by 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Central Time, 2 p.m. Pacific Time on Tuesday, May 24th. Send them early. Send them early, send them early, send them early. I say especially if you are not close to the East Coast, send them as early as possible, because mail has to travel. And we're still kind of dealing with the USPS being a little iffy. So we want to make sure that your ballot gets counted. And if it's not received by those times, then that's it.
And just to be really clear, it's not the workers of the United States Postal Service. They kick ass. It's the management of it.
100%. 5, ballot security. The independent election firm will maintain the ballots at all time during the election. That means these ballots aren't handled by our staff. These ballots aren't handled by other members. These ballots are not handled by candidates. Observers. Each candidate has the right to be present or designate an observer to be present at each stage of the ballot mailing, count, and tabulation process. That means if you want to see the meat being made, you can go see the meat being made. I like. I'm gonna not do that. You can just cut that out.
No, that's staying in. Are you crazy? Have you ever gone? Have you ever observed tabulation?
No, I have not observed tabulation. I have been working during every election. Shall we go on?
Sure. Section D is the ballot itself. So order of placement, this is interesting. The placement of a candidate's name on the ballot within each category shall be determined by a neutral selection method, and ballot placement will be determined on Friday, April 15th, 2022. So instead of the names being in alphabetical order, which could be seen to benefit the people with last names beginning with A and not people with last names beginning Z, or for instance, Rashaan James coming on a ballot before Sid Solomon. We don't want to assume that Rashaan James II is better than Sid Solomon, even though he obviously is. So the names on the ballot will be in no particular order, just the random way they've been assigned. Write-in votes are not permitted. There is no place on your ballot to write in a person who hasn't gone through the nominations process, because you have to have gone through the nominations process. To be elected a counselor, you need to have gone through the entire process, including making sure that they know that you're in good standing, not in conflict of interest, and that at least 17 people have said, yeah, this person should be able to run. Voter intent. Any ballot marked in a way as to reasonably indicate the intent of the voter will be counted. All decisions on voter intent will be made by the Election Compliance Committee. Rashaan, you and I are both of an age where we are old enough to remember the Florida recount of 2000 in the presidential election.
100%.
Which was all about, for those of our younger viewers, which is all about what was the intent of the voters. So our ballots are, you mark them off, with a pen or a pencil. If it is pretty clear what you meant, then they're going to count your vote. So, I mean, be clear, follow the instructions. If it says shade it in completely, or if it says make an X or a check, do that. But if you're not a good instruction follower and you circle the thing, but it's pretty clear you meant to circle the thing, they're going to count it. And if there's any question about it, they'll take it to the Election Compliance Committee, which again is made up of neutral folks who will do their best to determine what the heck you were thinking. And overvotes. A vote for more than the number of designated candidates in a particular category shall be invalidated only as to that portion of the ballot that relates to the overvote. All other categories, if properly voted, shall be counted. This is really important. Let's say that there are, and these aren't the actual numbers, I'm just making these up. Let's say that there are 5 open seats for Eastern Principal Counselor, and there are 10 candidates. You are allowed to vote for up to 5 because there are 5 open seats. You can vote for 1, you can vote for 2, you can vote for 5. You can vote for none. It's entirely up to you. What you cannot do is vote for more than 5. You can't say, I like all 10 of these people. They all deserve my vote. You'll check them all off. If you do that, none of the votes in the Eastern Principal section will count. Nothing will be counted on your ballot in the Eastern Principal section. But if you vote properly in the Eastern Chorus section, if there are 2 open seats and 3 candidates, and you vote for either 0, 1, or 2, then that will count. So this is just letting you know, if you overvote, your vote will be invalidated, but only in that category. And this usually only comes up if somebody makes a mistake in one category. They meant to vote for 5, but they actually voted for 6. And this is just a way of saying, it doesn't mean we've spoiled your entire ballot. We've just spoiled that one section where you made the mistake. So that's the ballot itself. That all clear, Rashaan?
Absolutely, yeah.
Great. All right, so the ballot count, Section E. You want to take this one?
Absolutely, the count. Ballots will be tabulated by an independent election firm on Wednesday, the 25th. That's pretty self-explanatory. Voter eligibility. Voter eligibility will be determined prior to the opening and counting of ballots. Members may challenge the eligibility of a voter by identifying the voter and clearly specifying the basis for the objection before any envelopes are opened. All decisions on voter eligibility will be made by the Election Compliance Committee, provided that the decisions on the conflict of interest will be made by the Executive Committee.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a thing that it's one of those rules that's important to have, even though I don't know of any time it's ever actually been used. The independent company is going to once they've received the ballots and they're about to start going through them, they are going to have checked with the union and gotten a list of all the people who are eligible to have voted. And in general, you're only going to get a ballot if you're eligible to vote. But if for some reason somebody who is observing that process has a reason to believe that there is an issue with the eligibility of a voter who has submitted a vote, then this is just outlining the process for what that challenge looks like. Again, I don't know of any instance in which this has ever happened, but I imagine that this is one of those things where, like, our lawyers want there to be a process in place for if someone says, wait, I know that person, they're not allowed to vote in this election. So we're not just, again, trying to figure it out on the fly. So we have a really clear rule that can be applied uniformly. And then when it talks about conflict of interest, we're going to come to that, I believe, later on in the document. So we'll put a pin in that and come back to it.
Yeah, challenge ballots. If ballots are challenged based on eligibility of the voter or for any other reason, the ballots will be segregated and only counted if they affect the outcome of the election. Multiple ballots. If more than one ballot is received from a member, the last ballot received shall be the one that is counted. So if you got a ballot and then you asked for another ballot and you sent both of them in, the one that they get second is the one that counts.
Have you ever done that before?
No.
I have.
My goodness, really?
I have, yeah, because I tend to vote pretty early. I am an impatient person. I don't know if you know that about me, Rashaan, having sat next to me for so long. But also, like, I do a lot of research on candidates. I also tend to know a lot of the people running. And I tend to make my decisions pretty early. And there was one situation in which I voted and I changed my mind about something. And this rule gives me the opportunity to say, I feel like I made a mistake, or, like, imagine a world in which I only voted for 3 candidates when there are actually 6 open slots. And I was like, oh, you know what? This 4th person, they've earned my vote. So I request another ballot. I fill it out. I send that one in, and I know that's the one that's going to get counted. It's the first one I sent in is not. So it's a really good opportunity for, if during the course of an election, if a candidate changes your mind, hopefully in a positive way, hopefully not in a negative way, you have the chance to change your vote. I think it's an important thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't even think about it that way. Plurality vote. Candidates shall be elected by a plurality of votes. That means the person with the most votes is the person that wins. Yes?
Yes. You don't need a majority. You just need to be the person with the most votes. So if there are 2 open seats and 3 people running, the 2 people with the highest number of votes win, even if they haven't received a majority of the votes cast in that category.
Yeah. Unopposed candidates. Candidates who are unopposed shall be deemed elected. I said this maybe in an earlier episode that I believe that unopposed candidates is undemocratic opinion. So let's make sure that we have at least 2 people in every category. Tie vote. In the event of a tie vote for any elected office, there should be a membership runoff election to decide the winner of that office. That means we will have a subsequent election where people get to vote again for that one.
Do you know, has that ever happened in equity history? I don't know.
I don't think so. I actually during the election procedures while we were working on this, I went back and tried to find. I went in our minutes and I could command F'd tie vote, and the only thing that I found were tie votes in council. Actually, I could not find an election tie vote, but I looked for it because I was curious if we've ever actually had one. Because this would actually cost us money.
It would. Can you imagine? I mean, like, every time I've gotten to the end of an election cycle when I'm running, I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I want it to be over. Can you imagine getting a result? It's a tie. Do it again. No.
No, I quit.
All right. Election results notification. This is pretty simple. Upon completion of the vote count, the results will be certified in writing by the independent election firm, and all candidates will be notified of the election results as soon as practicable. Public release of the names of those who are elected shall be posted in the member portal of the equity website as soon as possible. And effective date, all elected candidates shall assume their offices and positions immediately upon their election, which I think a lot of people don't know. So the first time I got elected in 2015, I'll always remember, I was still working for a Broadway merchandise company. I was working at Matilda the Musical at the time. I was sitting behind the merchandise counter at the Schubert Theater, and I got a phone call that looked like it was from Equity, and I let it go to voicemail, and it was Allison Bodwell, the Director of Governance, leaving me a voicemail saying, congratulations, you've been elected. And as of the moment that the votes are counted and they just determine who is elected, those people are counselors. They are counselors of the association, small letter O officers from that moment. There is no lag time. There is no inauguration date later on. You do, when you join the council, take an oath of office at your first council meeting, but it is ceremonial. You become a counselor immediately upon election. Not all unions do it that way. Ours does. So yeah. And then section 6, which is not quite the last section, but the last section of any length, section 6, eligibility challenges and post-election protests. This is a bit wonky and very important. So start us off with eligibility challenges.
Yeah, any member who desires to challenge a decision on a candidate's eligibility to run for office must file a written eligibility protest with the Election Compliance Committee, care of the election staff at the email address at the end of this document within 5 days of when the member knew or reasonably should have known of the basis for the eligibility challenge. So you write to the Election Compliance Committee through the election staff, which is at the end of this. We'll actually read that out loud, but you have to do it within 5 days of you knowing or should have known.
I cannot remember if this has happened in my time at Equity. I also don't know that I would necessarily know if a challenge was ever filed to somebody's eligibility. Because in general, again, to get onto the ballot, you're submitting all of these documents. You're submitting your signatures and you're submitting, your attestation that you're not in conflict of interest. And I assume that most eligibility challenges would have to do with conflict of interest status. If it is determined by the Election Compliance Committee that you knew about this for months and months and months, or I guess the election process isn't all that long, but if you saw that this person's name was on the ballot, you knew they were in conflict of interest, you sat on that information for 20, 25, 30 days, and then filed a challenge, that that challenge potentially would not be upheld. If you know somebody's in conflict as soon as they're on the ballot, or as soon as say something, so that we don't get to a place where a person has been campaigning for weeks and weeks and weeks, and they're on the ballot, and their campaign within the context of the larger campaign will have potentially affected the outcome. Like, let that person know that they're in conflict, let that decision be made, and then they can be removed from the ballot and it can be known, and then it can have as little effect on the actual outcome as possible. I guess it's just incentive to act when you know. If you knew somebody was in conflict of interest who was on the ballot, would you file a protest?
Yes.
Even if they were a person that you liked and was your friend?
Yes.
Why?
2 reasons. The big reason is I'm a fiduciary of the union.
Oh, yeah.
So anything that costs us money for no reason, I can't just let it go. Mm-hmm. But also because there is a certain amount of fairness that is required in the democratic structure. So,
all right. I'll keep going in section A.
Yeah. 2, members filing eligibility protests alleging that conflict of interest must provide evidence in support of their protests set forth specifically in Article 6 of the bylaws have been violated. This just means you have to show why this person is in conflict of interest. So if I am on the ballot and I am the artistic director of something, you just show there's probably a photo of me on that website, and you would just have to do that. Eligibility protests alleging a conflict of interest will be forwarded and resolved by the executive committee. This is the one where it does not go to the election compliance. It goes to the executive committee, which is like a small detail, but an interesting detail.
I love when you say something is interesting, and I know it's interesting to us, but not sure how interesting it would be to the greater viewing public. And to get, again, really into the weeds here, if you go to the member portal in the governance section under get involved under governance, you can find the conflict of interest procedures. And these are the procedures for if you believe a person is in conflict of interest, the procedures for which you can file essentially a challenge to that person's. And this isn't specific to elections, just in terms of, of all of the various things that employer members, as defined by the bylaws, are prohibited from doing, which includes running for council and sitting on council, but also all sorts of other things, including attending most equity meetings. And just because we've talked about the makeup of the Election Compliance Committee, Rashaan, let's talk about the Executive Committee. Who is on the Executive Committee and how do they get there?
Yeah, so automatically, by virtue of office, our capital O officers, the 8 of them are on. And then we have 3 people from each region represented on the executive committee. And it's not done by job category, it's just 3 people who are elected by the National Council on the committee. I sit on executive committee currently. I am one of the Eastern.
I forgot that.
I am one of the Eastern counselors on executive committee. Executive committee is my favorite committee because it is we do the wonkiest work of everything in executive committee, and it's so nitty gritty and it's like fun, great work. Sorry, there's a dog barking.
In case you're paying attention, so that's 8 officers of the union plus 9 additional counselors, 3 from each region, which brings the total of the executive committee to 17. You'll remember that number because 17 is the number of signatures you need to get nominated to office. 17 is also the quorum requirement for a council meeting. 17 is a weirdly magical number at Actors Equity, and I don't think there's any reason for it other than it just shows up over and over and over again. So for those of you who are aspiring numerologists, if you have an idea for why the number 17 is special, you let us know. But otherwise, that's just a tiny little piece of equity minutia.
Yeah. Number 3. Members filing all other eligibility protests must provide evidence and set forth with specificity of the basis and the claim that a candidate is ineligible to run for office. These protests will be resolved by Election Compliance Committee. That means everything else, if you feel like somebody isn't actually eligible, you have to provide a way to say why and what, and then that goes to the Election Compliance Committee.
Sure. So that could be anything from a person being under the age of 18 to the fact that they're not a member in good standing. It could have to do with their place of residence. Any of the things that are not conflict of interest handled by election compliance. Great. Should we do election protests?
Absolutely.
Can I do election protests?
You can do election protests.
These are fun. So any protest regarding an alleged violation of the election policy, the equity constitution and bylaws, or applicable federal election law must be filed in writing with the Election Compliance Committee, care of the election staff, no later than 10 days after the count. That's the count of the votes. That's tabulation day. The protest shall set forth with reasonable specificity the nature of the alleged violation, the facts underlying it, and how it may have affected the outcome of the election. So let's just stop right there. If you think that somebody broke the rules, and that's the rules laid out in this document, the rules in the Constitution and bylaws or federal law, you have to, within 10 days of tabulation, send that complaint to the equity election staff, who will then send it to the Election Compliance Committee. And you can't just say the rules are broken, you have to provide evidence, not just that the rules were broken, but that the rules broken affected the outcome of the election. We'll keep going. The Election Compliance Committee shall consider all facts it deems appropriate to resolve an election protest and may, in its discretion, hold a telephonic hearing concerning any such protests. If the Election Compliance Committee believes that a violation may have occurred, it will send the affected candidate or candidates a copy of the protest. The affected candidate or candidates will have 5 days to submit evidence to the Election Compliance Committee in opposition to the protest. The Election Compliance Committee shall render its decision within 45 days following the date of the election, and the Election Compliance Committee's decision shall be final and binding. Elections challenged by a member are presumed valid unless and until the same or other candidate is elected in a rerun election. So let's cover all of that. And this is something that has happened since I've been on council. There have been a handful of protests filed, and that is a common thing in all unions. It is common that protests are filed. Sometimes they are for good reasons, sometimes they are for less than good reasons, sometimes they are valid, sometimes they are not really. But all unions have to have a process for accepting protests and going through a process. And I'm fairly certain, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm fairly certain that the law requires that before anybody bring an accusation of election malfeasance to the federal government, they must first exhaust all internal remedies at their union. So if you go to the feds and say, this election was a mess and people broke all sorts of laws, they'll ask you, did you go through your union's process for filing a challenge? And if you say no, they'll say, well, then you're SOL. Sorry, you had a process. You should have given them the opportunity to do the right thing first before coming to us. So this is the process that equity lays out. So let's talk about this as if it were going to happen. Let's say Rashaan was, in fact, a poopy head and ran for election in 2022 and broke all of the rules. All of the rules. He wrote up fake equity letterhead and wrote up a letter that said, "Dear equity members, Actors Equity Association says I'm the best. Rashaan for chorus council. Yeah." And then distributed that and went to a bunch of people's workplaces and campaigned in their rehearsal studios and on the stages during work hours, and took thousands of dollars from employers in under the table money. He would never do that, but let's just say he did. And I saw all this go down. And like Rashaan said, if you see something, you should say something, and I'm going to report him. He's my friend and I love him, but I'll report you for all this, Rashaan. So I collect all of the evidence that I have to say all of these rules were broken. And he won by not very many votes. So it's really reasonable to assume that a bunch of the votes that he got from all of this activity did affect the outcome of the election. I put together all of that evidence into a packet. I send it to Equity's election staff, and then it gets sent to the Election Compliance Committee. But I have to do that within 10 days of tabulation day. Within 10 days, I have to put all that information together and get that sent forward. The Election Compliance Committee will look at all of that information. They'll see if they think it is reasonable. If they want to, they can hold a hearing, telephonic hearing. You know, that's old language. They do it via Zoom, like you do everything these days. If the Election Compliance Committee, whether they hold that hearing together among themselves, if they believe that a violation may have occurred and has affected the outcome of the election, they will send the affected candidates a copy of the protest. In this instance, they would send Rashaan a copy of this protest. And depending on, they might also send it to other people who were running in his category who might have been affected at their discretion. The affected candidates, be that Rashaan or anybody else who might have been disadvantaged by this, will have 5 days from the day that they receive that, that notification from the Compliance Committee to respond, to say, no, there was no violation of the rules, there was no violation of the law, and this is why. And they have the right to, if they want to, respond in any way they see fit. And then the Election Compliance Committee will take all of that information and they will, within 45 days from tabulation, they have to do it within 45 days, they will make a decision. Now, during that entire process, Rashaan, who was elected in that election, even though we think he committed a lot of malfeasance, Rashaan is a counselor. The results of the election stand. Like we said, the minute that you are elected, you become a counselor. Rashaan would be on the council for that entire time. There's nothing to be done about that. He won the election. He's holding the seat. He doesn't get held in escrow. He's not just sitting off to the side and isn't allowed to vote. He gets to participate as if he is a counselor because he is. Unless and until the committee rules, hey, we need to rerun this portion of the election, and we're going to rerun it. And so they would then have to set forth all the conditions of that election. They'd have to let the members know. They'd have to write up probably another one of these documents and say, this is how we're going to do this election. We'd go through that process and we'd run the election again. And then when the results of that rerun happen, those people elected would then be deemed counselors and the people not would not. So again, paramount, do not break the rules. Certainly, if you find out you have broken a rule, which happens, it happens. Rashaan, have you ever unwittingly broken a rule?
Yes.
So have I. It happens. These rules are complicated, and Rashaan and I have not always been wonky equity folks. We were both first-time candidates once upon a time who didn't know very much about equity. And then we won, and that's how we learned. So yeah, we've both broken rules before. And we have been blessed with supportive mentors and friends who will say, hey, by the way, you probably shouldn't do that. That might actually be a violation. And then you just stop doing it. And then there's likely no impact on the election at all. So even if somebody said, Sid broke a rule, the election compliance committee, if they got that far, would say, but it didn't affect the election. Like for 2 seconds, he forgot to take down the equity logo from like a Facebook page. And then somebody pointed out to him, he took it down. There's no reasonable way to say that the 180 votes that he won by would have been diminished by 181 because of that. So that is the process that's laid out for if you believe that somebody has broken one of these rules, what you do and what the remedy is. But as you can see, none of it's great. So let's just avoid it, please. And then finally, Section 7, additional nominations and elections procedures. This just says the council or its designee may adopt additional nominations and election procedures consistent with the Constitution and bylaws and applicable federal law. This means that if in 2 weeks, Rashaan is like, there's something we forgot to put in this document that's super important, whether it's just a really specific example of something or a rule that we haven't clarified or a new rule we really need that we forgot about. There's nothing that would prevent the council from adding to this document or removing something from this document or changing the rules in any way, so long as it comported with the Constitution, the bylaws, and federal law. Okay. That is all 7 sections of the document. We are on page, I've got this paper and I'm on my screen, so we're on page 15. Rashaan, page 16 and page 17 are not rules, but they're super important. What's on the last 2 pages of this document?
So these are the things you need in case you need something. So email elections@actorsequity.org. The phone number is 212-869-8530, extension 220. And then there's the addresses for the 3 offices. I'm not going to read those addresses because I don't want you to send anything.
Don't show up in person. Don't send anything in the mail. Just don't do it. It's just don't do it. Just don't do it.
Then there's the address for the balloting company, which you should not need, but you might need help desk at voteges.com. I actually had to send an email last election or maybe the election before that about my ballot. And then here's the election calendar. So Wednesday, the 16th, March 16th, notice of elections will be sent to all members. The candidate packets will be available. The 6th of April is the deadline of nominating or the submission of nominating petitions. They're due by 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 11 Pacific. We talked about the bullet point that's there. April 11th is the last day that you can say, you know what, I did that work, but I don't want to be on the ballot. Last day to resign. The 12th is the last day to submit the protest by 5:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Central, 2:30 p.m. Pacific. 4/13 is deadline for candidate statements and headshots for the member portal on the Equity website. You'll see the due dates there. 4/15, a list of ballot placements order will be available on the Equity website by close of business. That means everything that the random whatever, whether they're using names in a hat or they're using a website. I actually think they use an automated website that just randomizes everything. That's the day that you'll see the list. You'll find out if you're running, you'll find out where your name falls on the ballot. You'll also find out where everybody else's names falls on the ballot. April 26th is distribution of the ballots. This comes from the balloting company. They will send it out to all of the members who should receive a ballot. 5/16 is the deadline to say, hey, I didn't get my ballot. Or to say, now I learned something new today. Or to say, hey, I voted, but I think I want to replace my vote with the new replacement ballot. You can get a new one and vote, get that by the 16th of May. May 24th, deadline of receipts of ballots. That means this deadline, put 3 days in front of it, and that's your new deadline.
At least
3 days.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many ways I can say this. Do it early as you can, period. And because I learned this new thing today, vote early just in case something happens and you're like, oh, well, maybe I do need to change my mind. Deadline for members to be paid up in their dues and to have ballots counted by 5 p.m. 4 p.m. You have the dates. That's the 24th also. And then the 25th is tabulation day. I'm not sure if that's going to be an in-person thing this year. We don't know yet. Then the day after that, notification of results. And then a little bit after that, on the 6th of June, is the deadline to submit election protests. Mm-hmm. So that is the entire packet, 17 pages. It's a lot. Mm-hmm. But I think we broke the things that are very wonky down. If there are any questions, you can either go to www.wonkyweekly.com and like go into our forum and ask us questions there, or like send me an email directly. I still have an equity email address. I'm still a counselor. rjames@actorsequity.org. Sid gets the emails to the website, so send them to the website. But yeah, we're here to answer questions. And the big thing is understand, vote, or run.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So if that sounds like something that you're up for and interested in, consider it. Reach out to us. We have experience both running and winning and losing, both of us. And we'll happily talk to you about it. But yeah, consider running. If not running, consider getting involved. And even if not getting involved, vote.
Vote.
Learn about the candidates. Reach out to the candidates. Reach out to us, and we'll tell you where the candidates are so you can reach out to them directly. We'll help you connect with candidates. If you want to know more about them, we will send you directly to them. And get involved. An involved, informed electorate makes for a stronger, healthier union.
We right now have 11% of our membership that votes around. That is an abominable number because everybody has an opinion in this business. Every single one of our members believes in something. So 11% is terrible. So vote, even if you vote in one category, even if you choose to say, I am only voting for the first vice president. If that's your choice, do it. But at least be a part of the democratic structure that elects the people who make the decisions for the union that you are a part of. Be a part of it. Participate. Check a box. And ask us if you need some help.
100%. I think that's a great place to leave it. You feel like we've covered everything, Rashaan?
I absolutely do.
All right. Well, thank you everybody again for joining us for another episode of Wonky Weekly. I am Sid Solomon.
I'm Rashaan James II.
And we will see you next week.